When Jack Harper came home from the battlefield, he thought his war was over. But nothing could prepare him for what he found: his little girl, Ellie, covered in strange red marks and whispering about creatures that crawled from beneath her pillow. What seemed like a child's nightmare soon unraveled into something far darker. A secret experiment called Project K-21, and a father's fight to save his daughter from becoming its next victim. They say memory is a tricky thing, that it dulls with time, that the edges of horror soften, blur, fade until you can pretend it was all a bad dream. But some memories, no matter how many years crawl over them, burn themselves into the bone. And for me, it was a sound, a whisper. A child's whisper in the dark. I can hear it even now. Like dry leaves scraping against a window. Like something alive but not meant for this world. The night it happened, I had just come back from deployment. My boots still carried the desert dust, clinging to the cracked leather like ghosts I couldn't shake off. The house was too quiet when I opened the door. No music, no television, no soft humming of the woman I once thought I could trust. Just silence and the smell of something faintly chemical, sharp, unnatural. I remember pausing in the hallway. The floorboards beneath me groaned with a weight they seemed unwilling to bear. Every sound echoed too loud, too long, like the house itself was holding its breath. And then so faint, I thought it might have been my imagination. I heard it, from upstairs. A voice, not a voice exactly, a whisper. At first, I thought Ellie was talking in her sleep. Children do that, don't they? Mumbling nonsense into the night. But as I crept toward her room, the whisper thickened, split, became something more than just a little girl's restless dreaming. Her bedroom door was ajar, a thin crack of pale light spilling from the night lamp inside. I pushed it open gently, afraid that if I moved too quickly, the moment would shatter and whatever was inside would vanish before I could name it. Ellie lay curled on her side, her tiny chest rising and falling in the rhythm of uneasy sleep. The lamp painted her face in soft gold, highlighting the streaks of dried tears along her cheeks. Her pillow looked wrong, stuffed too high, as though something beneath it shifted, breathed. And then I saw them, the marks. At first glance, I thought it was just a rash. Children get them all the time: heat, allergies, the body's stubborn rebellion against the world. But when I leaned closer, the breath caught in my throat. These weren't rashes. They were patterns, faint, glowing in the dim light like embers, buried under skin. Swirls and lines that almost formed shapes that hurt to look at too long, as though my mind rejected them, as though they belonged to a language older than words. Her arm twitched, her lips moved, and in the smallest, softest voice, Ellie whispered, "They're under my pillow, Daddy. They drink when I'm asleep." I froze. I'd been through firefights, ambushes, the kind of nights where survival balanced on the edge of a trigger pull. But nothing in war prepared me for that, for the raw certainty in her voice. I wanted to tell myself it was a dream, that she was just talking nonsense the way children do. But the way her body shivered, the way her hand instinctively covered her arm where the marks burned faintly, I knew. Deep down I knew. I reached out, my hand trembling, and brushed her hair back. Her skin felt hot, feverish. And when her eyelids fluttered open, her eyes weren't the eyes of a child who'd just woken from a nightmare. They were wide, knowing, terrified. "Don't look," she whispered again, this time clutching the pillow tighter. "They don't like it when you look." The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. I could feel it pressing in on me, the kind of silence that isn't empty, but crowded thick with things unseen, things waiting. I wanted to tear the pillow away, to rip it open and prove to myself there was nothing there. But some primal instinct rooted me in place. Every soldier learns to listen to his gut, and mine screamed at me that if I moved too quickly, if I dared disturb whatever lay beneath, I might see something I could never unsee. So instead, I sat down beside her bed, my weight sinking the mattress. just slightly. I took her hand in mine, feeling the faint tremor that rippled through her. "Ellie," I whispered. "What's under there?" Her lips quivered. And then, with a courage too heavy for her small years, she lifted the corner of the pillow. Nothing. Just the white cotton sheets beneath. Relief rushed through me, ridiculous and fleeting. But then I saw it, too quick, too subtle, but I swear. To you it was there, a shimmer. A ripple, as though the air itself bent and recoiled, as though something invisible had just slithered deeper into the mattress, escaping the light. Ellie yanked the pillow back down and buried her face against it. "See," she whispered. "They don't like the light." I didn't sleep that night. I sat there watching her. Every so often, her small body would jerk, her breathing would quicken, and the faint glow beneath her skin would pulse like fireflies trapped in flesh. I checked her arms, her legs, even the back of her neck. The marks weren't fading. They were spreading, branching like roots, threading into her veins. The dread that settled in me that night has never left. It was more than fear. It was the weight of helplessness, the knowledge that my training, my weapons, my discipline meant nothing here. This was a battlefield I couldn't navigate. And yet, I couldn't walk away. I couldn't admit what every instinct screamed. That something unspeakable had claimed my daughter. There's a moment when a father realizes he can't protect his child. I'd always thought that moment came in war stories and tales of men, forced to watch their families perish while they were helpless to intervene. But no, it comes in the quiet, in the whisper of a child's breath, in the sight of marks on skin that should never have been there. I sat in that room for hours, my heart pounding against the silence. And then, as dawn's first pale light crept through the curtains, I asked myself the question I've never stopped asking since. Have you ever looked into a child's eyes and known something unspeakable was feeding on them? That morning, when the sun rose and painted her skin in fragile warmth, I thought the worst had passed. Her breathing steadied. Her tiny hand relaxed in mine. The marks dulled, faint enough to pretend they weren't there at all. I told myself it was a dream, that she'd be fine. That children whisper strange things in the night, and fathers see monsters where there are none. But the lie didn't last. Because later that day, when the truth began to unfurl, when I discovered what had been done to her, I realized the creatures weren't the worst of it. That night, I thought I'd lost her. But the truth was worse than death. They tell you a man is made of the years he can't shake. The small ones, the quiet ones, the ones you don't even know, are sharpening you for the storms ahead. And before the whispers, before the marks on Ellie's skin, before the nights that bled into horror, there was a boy. A boy named Jack Harper, running through the dirt roads of a town so small you could hear its heartbeat if you stood still long enough. Jack grew up in the kind of place where everyone knew the sound of everyone else's screen door. One main street, two churches, a diner that smelled of fried eggs and coffee strong enough to peel paint. It was America in miniature, Saturday parades, Sunday sermons, and the weight of history sewn into every flag that hung in the windows. His father, Samuel Harper, was a veteran of a war that never really left him. He wasn't a man of many words. But when he spoke, it was usually about honor, sacrifice, or the price men pay when the world calls them to bleed. "You don't measure a man by what he keeps," Samuel would say, resting his weathered hand on young Jack's shoulder. "You measure him by what he's willing to give away." And Jack listened. He always listened. But childhood has a way of hiding shadows behind light. Jack's earliest memories weren't of war stories or folded flags. They were of fireflies. On summer nights, he'd chase them through the tall grass with a mason jar, barefoot, his laughter echoing against the tree line. The glow would rise all around him, 100 tiny lanterns swaying in the dusk, and for a moment, the world felt safe. But even then, he swore he saw things in the corner of his vision, dark shapes flitting just beyond the glow. He'd blink, and they'd be gone. His father would tell him it was nothing, just the tricks of a boy's eyes in the dark. Yet something in Jack always wondered if the shadows were waiting for the fireflies to burn out. When he was 9, his father took him fishing at Miller's Lake, a quiet patch of water that looked like glass when the wind died down. They'd sit in silence, rods in the water, Samuel smoking a pipe that smelled of old wood and patience. "War teaches you things you don't want to learn," his father said one evening as the sun slipped low, painting the lake blood orange. "But family, Jack. Family teaches you why you fight in the first place." Jack never forgot that. The image of his father's profile against the fading sun, the ripple of the line stretching out across the water, the quiet conviction in his voice, it carved itself into the boy's bones. It was then Jack decided he'd serve too. Not because of glory, not because of medals, but because sacrifice was stitched into the Harper name. Still, the shadows never left. At night, he'd lie awake, listening to the house groan under the weight of silence. Sometimes the wind would whistle through the eaves in a voice too close to words. Other times, he'd wake with the certainty that someone was standing at the foot of his bed. His mother, a gentle woman with hands always busy at the sewing machine, would hush him back to sleep. "Dreams, Jack," she'd whisper. "Just dreams." But even as a boy, he wondered, what if dreams were just the places where the truth slipped through? The years rolled by like freight trains on distant tracks. Jack grew into broad shoulders, a steady hand, and a reputation for keeping his word. He played football under the Friday night lights, worked summers in the auto shop, and earned nods from men who measured respect in silence more than words. When he turned 18, he signed his enlistment papers with the same pen his father had used decades before. His mother cried. His father didn't, but when Jack looked close, he saw the storm in his eyes. "You'll come back, Samuel," Sod, gripping his son's hand with a strength that carried both blessing and command. And Jack believed him. Years later, after boot camps, after deployments, after the kind of nights where sleep came only in broken fragments, Jack came home. On leave. And that's when it happened. That's when he held her for the first time, Ellie, his daughter. She was small enough to fit in one arm, her body wrapped in a hospital blanket that smelled faintly of powder and antiseptic. Her fingers so tiny, so impossibly delicate, curled around his calloused thumb like ivy claiming stone. And in that moment, all the weight of war, all the shadows he had carried from boyhood to manhood, fell away. He thought, this is it. This is what every sacrifice was for. "I thought my life had found its anchor," the old man's voice would later say, soft with the ache of memory. "And for a little while, I was right, but anchors can drift." And from the very beginning, Ellie carried something fragile inside her. As a baby, she would sometimes burn with fevers that no doctor could explain. The thermometer would climb, her tiny body trembling. And then, just as suddenly, it would break, leaving her exhausted but untouched by lasting harm. Other times, she'd wake crying at things unseen. Not the usual wail of a child hungry or wet, but a sharp, terrified cry that clawed at the night air. Jack would rush in, scoop her up, whispering promises that she was safe. But her wide eyes staring past him into the corners of the room made him wonder if she knew something he didn't. One night, when she was barely 2, Jack found her standing in her crib, reaching toward the ceiling with both arms as if something hovered there. "Up," she said, her voice trembling. "Up there." But when Jack followed her gaze, there was nothing. Just the hum of the ceiling fan and the shadows of the blades spinning slow circles. He told himself it was imagination. Children see things. Children invent fears out of the dark. But still, the memory clung. Jack was a soldier and a father. In fragments. He'd be home long enough to see Ellie take her first steps, then gone again before her second birthday candles were blown out. He'd return to find her taller, her voice clearer, her questions sharper. Each leave was like stepping into a life that wasn't waiting for him, but rushing forward without him. Still, every time he came back, Ellie ran to him with arms outstretched. And every time, he promised himself he'd never let her down. He'd kneel on the living room carpet, building block towers with her until she knocked them over with laughter. He'd spin her in the air until both of them were dizzy. He'd sit at her bedside, telling her stories of brave knights and safe castles, all while silently wishing he could promise her the same. But deep down, in the quiet hours when she shivered with fever or whimpered at unseen shadows, he wondered if he was fighting a war that had begun long before she was born. Looking back now, I see the signs more clearly than I did then. The way her skin sometimes seemed too pale, almost translucent, veins tracing patterns like hidden maps. The way she'd wake in the night whispering words too old for her years. I brushed it off. I told myself she was fine, that children grow out of fevers, that nightmares fade with age. But if I had listened closer, if I had understood what her blood was already carrying. The old man's voice cracks here, heavy with regret. If I'd known then what lived in her blood, he says, his words sinking like stones into silence. I have never let her sleep alone. They say the hardest part of war isn't the bullets or the bombs. It's the coming home, the silence after the storm. The way your boots, still caked with foreign dust, step back into a house that no longer feels like yours. That night when Jack Harper came home, the desert followed him inside. His duffel bag thudded against the wooden porch. The house loomed ahead, familiar but altered. Paint chipped a little more, curtains drawn tighter than he remembered. No laughter spilled from the windows. No music hummed low from the old radio his wife used to keep near the kitchen sink. Only silence. Jack turned the knob and stepped in. The floorboards greeted him with a long groaning sigh, as if the house itself had grown weary of waiting. He pulled off his gloves, still stained from sand and oil, and let the door close behind him. The smell hit him first. Not bad, not foul, just different. A faint chemical sharpness, bleach maybe, but laced with something sweeter, artificial. Like the house had been scrubbed of its soul and polished to shine for strangers. Jack, her voice floated from the kitchen doorway. Vanessa. She appeared with a smile too perfect, too practiced. Her blonde hair framed her face in careful waves, her nails painted a red that caught the dim light like blood beneath glass. On the surface, she was the picture of composure, the kind of woman who could host a dinner party without a single thread out of place. But her eyes never warmed. They lingered on him like a mirror, reflecting nothing back. "You're early," she said, though her tone made it sound more like an inconvenience than a surprise. Jack nodded, dropping his bag by the the wall. "Got out sooner than expected." "That's good." She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her dress, her smile frozen. "Ellie's upstairs. She's been asking about you." And with that, Vanessa vanished back into the kitchen, her heels clicking against the tile like a metronome counting down to something unseen. Jack's chest tightened as he climbed the stairs. His boots were heavy, each step echoing memories of sand and fire, but lighter now with the thought of what waited at the top. He pushed open the door to Ellie's room. There she was, his little girl. Ellie sprang from her bed with a squeal, her small feet padding across the carpet as she launched into his arms. Jack scooped her up, pressing his face into her hair. Drinking in the scent of her shampoo, the warmth of her laughter against his chest. "I missed you, Daddy," she whispered. "I missed you too, Peanut." For a moment, the warmth melted away. For a moment, it was just them. But then, as she leaned back, her sleeve slipped. Jack's smile faltered. There, on her forearm, faint red streaks traced along her pale skin. Not scratches, not bruises, something stranger. Lines that curved almost deliberately, like writing. Half erased, or veins lit from within, his stomach lurched. "What's this?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Ellie tugged her sleeve back down quickly, eyes darting toward the door. Nothing, Daddy, just nothing. But he felt it, the quickening of his pulse, the soldier's instinct that never left him. Something was wrong. He kissed her forehead, forcing steadiness into his voice. We'll talk later, okay? Ellie nodded, but her small hands clutched his shirt tighter, as though she was afraid he might vanish if she let go. That evening, they sat at the dinner table. Vanessa served roast chicken and potatoes, her movements precise, rehearsed. She asked Jack about his deployment in clipped tones, but her eyes wandered past him, never truly landing. Ellie picked at her food, quiet. Jack noticed her glancing at Vanessa, then back at her plate, like a bird afraid of a sudden hand. You all right, Peanut? Jack asked softly. Ellie nodded quickly. But she didn't eat. Vanessa's smile stretched thinner. She's been difficult lately. Nightmares. Imaginary friends. The usual nightmares? Jack asked. Children's minds are wild, Vanessa said with a dismissive wave. She'll outgrow it, but Jack had seen nightmares. Real ones. They didn't leave streaks on skin. Later, when the house settled into silence, Jack tucked Ellie into bed. The lamp glowed faintly, casting soft halos against the walls. Daddy, Ellie whispered, eyes wide. Jack knelt beside her. What is it, sweetheart? Her voice trembled, small and secret. There are creatures under my pillow. They drink while I sleep. The words dropped like stones into his chest. What do you mean? He asked carefully. Ellie shook her head, curls brushing the pillow. They don't like when I talk about it, but they come every night. Jack swallowed hard. Creatures? She nodded, pulling the blanket to her chin. Little whispers, crawling. They take things from me. Her eyes welled with tears. That's why it hurts, Daddy. He brushed her hair back gently, masking his dread with calm. I'm here now. I won't let anything hurt you. But as he kissed her goodnight and turned off the lamp, his mind raced. War had taught him many things, but not how to fight creatures that lived under pillows. The house slept. Vanessa's door was closed. The ticking of the old clock downstairs filled the silence like a steady heartbeat. Jack lay in his own bed, but sleep didn't come. He stared at the ceiling, Ellie's words gnawing at him. He tried to tell himself it was nightmares, the product of a child's imagination. But the soldier in him, the man who had learned to listen for what others ignored, knew better. Some fears don't come from nowhere. And then he heard it. At first, it was faint. So faint he thought it was the settling of the house. But no, it grew clearer. A sound from upstairs. From Ellie's room, a scuttling, like nails scratching wood. Like something small, many-legged, moving fast beneath her bed. Jack sat up, every nerve alight. The old man's voice pauses here, heavy with memory. I'd been in firefights where bullets cut the air like hornets. I'd crawled through ruins where death stank in every corner. But that night, in my own house, I heard something I'd never heard before, and God help me. It came from my daughter's room. The sound stopped. Silence swallowed the house again. And Jack knew this was only the beginning. They say a soldier's war ends when he comes home. That once the boots are unstrapped, the rifle cleaned, the uniform folded away, peace returns. But they don't tell you about the other kind of war, the one you fight in your own house. The one where the enemy hides behind smiles and locked doors. The one where your mind itself becomes the battlefield. That was Jack Harper's long struggle. After the scuttling in the dark, Jack didn't sleep, not really. He'd close his eyes, but the silence of the house pressed too heavy. The way silence in war zones meant something was about to explode. He began listening. Every creak of the floorboards. Every shift of wind through the eaves. Every soft whimper. From Ellie's room, the whispers came often, too often. Not always words, sometimes just sounds, faint, insectal, slithering. Other times, voices low and urgent, like conversations happening just below the edge of hearing. Jack found himself sitting in the hallway at night, back against the wall, his daughter's bedroom door in sight. He'd wait, staring into the dark heart, pounding each time he thought he saw a flicker of movement beneath her doorframe. He told himself he was protecting her, but part of him knew he was also watching for something else, something he couldn't name. It was during these nights that he began to notice Vanessa. At first, it was little things. The way she lingered. On phone calls, speaking in hushed tones, her back turned, her words clipped and cold. When he walked into the room, she'd hang up quickly, smile too brightly, and ask about his day. The way she kept the basement door locked now, though it had never been before. When he asked, she said there were cleaning supplies. Dangerous for Ellie, but he had seen her disappear down there for hours. The sound of faint humming machinery seeping up through the floorboards. Once, when she thought he was asleep, he watched her move down the hallway, carrying something small and metallic in her hands. She went straight to the basement. When she returned, the object was gone. Jack didn't ask. Not yet. But the unease built, brick by brick, walling him into his own suspicion. But suspicion cuts both ways. Jack had seen too much. The desert still lived in him, dust storms of memory that clouded his thoughts, flashes of gunfire in his sleep. The metallic taste of fear that never truly left. There were moments he questioned himself. Was he hearing whispers, or was his mind replaying the shouts of fallen comrades in the sand? Were the scuttling noises under Ellie's bed real, or the echo of rats in burned-out houses he'd once cleared overseas? He remembered the VA doctors, their voices patient, measured. PTSD, Mr. Harper, hallucinations, hypervigilance, nothing unusual for veterans. And sometimes, at 3 a.m., staring at the crack of light under Ellie's door, Jack wondered, am I losing her, or am I losing myself? But the evidence, the flesh and blood evidence, kept mounting. Ellie was changing. Her cheeks grew pale, drained of color, as if something were feeding on her from the inside. Her hands trembled when she lifted a spoon. Her fevers came more frequently now, burning so hot one night that Jack nearly rushed her to the ER, only to find the heat vanish minutes later, leaving her limp but conscious. The doctors were no help. They ran tests, blood work, scans. All came back inconclusive. Children get strange fevers, they said. It's viral, temporary. She grow out of it, but Jack saw the truth in her eyes. Eyes too tired for her age. Eyes that carried a knowledge she shouldn't have had. One night, while holding her as she shook with another fever, she whispered into his chest, "They're taking pieces of me, Daddy, bit by bit." And Jack felt his heart break in silence. It was during one of his sleepless vigils that Jack stumbled across the first hint. He had risen to get a glass of water, padding quietly down the hallway when he passed Vanessa's study. The door was ajar, light spilling out. She wasn't inside. On the desk, half covered by folders, was a document. Just one page. He leaned closer. Across the top, stamped in faded ink, were the words, Project K21, property of United States Biological Advancement Division. His blood ran cold. The rest of the text was jargon, scientific terms, references to serum trials, juvenile tissue compatibility, and fluid extraction protocols. He didn't understand most of it. But one phrase stood out: subject viability, dependent on sustained parasitic bonding at the neurosomatic interface. Jack shoved the paper back under the folders just as he heard footsteps behind him. Vanessa's voice, sweet and casual. "Can't sleep?" He forced a smile, heart pounding, jet lag. Her eyes lingered on him a moment too long before she nodded and walked past. From that night forward, Vanessa's mask began to slip. When Ellie coughed at the dinner table, Vanessa didn't flinch. didn't reach for her, didn't show concern. Instead, she scolded her for making a mess of her napkin. When Ellie fainted in the hallway one morning, Jack rushed to scoop her up. Vanessa only sighed, muttering, "She's always been fragile. Don't make it worse by babying her." And once Jack swore he saw it, when Ellie clung to him, Vanessa's lips twitched into something almost like a smile. Not of kindness, but of cold satisfaction. The old man's voice lingers here, bitter with memory. There are women who wear masks of warmth. But every mask cracks if you stare long enough. And God help me, I stared too long before I acted. The turning point came on a rain-soaked evening. The storm rattled the windows, lightning flashing in fractured bursts. Jack had put Ellie to bed, her body weak from another unexplained fever. He tucked her in gently, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. When he stepped into the hallway, he noticed Vanessa's room was empty. Her purse was gone. And something in him, call it instinct, call it desperation, pulled him toward her dresser. The drawer slid open with a reluctant squeal. Inside, cosmetics, perfume bottles, the ordinary clutter of a woman's private space. But beneath them, hidden under a silk scarf, he found it. A small vial, glass, inside, a clear liquid that shimmered faintly in the dim light. And on the label, scrawled in clinical black ink, E. H. Ellie Harper. Jack's hand shook as he held it. His mind screamed. Denial, excuses, explanations. But in his gut, in the marrow of his bones, he knew. The whispers, the fevers, the red streaks on her skin. Vanessa's locked doors and hushed calls. The document marked Project K21. It all converged in that vial. The old man's voice drops to a whisper here, grave and heavy. That was the night I realized my little girl wasn't just sick. She was being used. The closer you get to the truth, the more it slips through your fingers. That's what I learned in those nights. Truth doesn't stand still. It hides, shifts, crawls. Sometimes it even whispers. And for Jack Harper, the truth began unraveling the night he followed Vanessa. She thought he was asleep. That was her first mistake. Jack had spent too many years in hostile terrain to let sleep dull his senses. He heard the click of her heels against the tile, the faint clatter of keys, the hush of the front door closing at midnight. He followed. Rain slicked the streets, neon from the distant gas station blurring in puddles. He kept his distance, boots silent on the wet pavement, his breath steady despite the storm pounding against his jacket. Vanessa's car polished. Black sedan rolled through town until it stopped in the empty lot behind the abandoned textile mill. That's when he saw them. The SUVs, black, tinted, idling with engines humming low, like beasts crouched in the dark. Vanessa stepped out, umbrella in hand, her face composed, her stride confident. She walked straight to the men waiting by the SUVs. Their suits were too sharp for the rain, their movements too precise to be ordinary. They didn't shake hands. They didn't smile. They exchanged envelopes, small metal cases, words Jack couldn't hear over the storm. But the way one of the men leaned close, pointing at the mill, made Jack's stomach clench. Because the mill wasn't just any place. It was where the government had stored old records, sealed boxes of experiments the public had long forgotten. And suddenly, Jack knew what Vanessa had been guarding in that locked basement. He waited until she was gone. Waited until the SUVs melted back into the storm. Then he returned home, his pulse drumming. That night, he broke into the basement. The lock gave after a few minutes of work. The smell hit him first sterile, metallic, tinged with rot. The hum of machines vibrated faintly through the cement floor. Inside were shelves. Not storage shelves, but cold steel racks lined with folders, tapes, and containers. Fluorescent lights flickered above, revealing dustless order. As though someone cleaned here off him. Jack pulled a folder at random. The words across the top stopped his breath. Project K21 Phase 2 Field Trials. Inside, reports, photographs, data tables, children's names replaced by codes, notes about protein viability, neural extractions, subject mortality rate. He scanned pages that described the creature's genetically modified organisms, engineered to attach themselves to children while they slept, feeding invisibly, extracting proteins that the military believed could enhance human endurance, cognition, even resilience to disease. And then he saw it. A photo. Not a metaphor, not an idea, a creature. It looked like something between an insect and a leech, its body translucent, its limbs needle-thin, rows of hooks along its underside. And the caption beneath the image, parasitic bonding organism, K21, a deployment successful in bedding materials. Jack's hand shook as he dropped the photo. He stumbled back, knocking over a box. It spilled open Ellie's toys. Her doll, her stuffed rabbit, the blanket she'd slept with since she was a toddler, all stored down here, tagged, marked, logged. And he remembered the way she'd screamed in the night, the way she'd pointed to her pillow, whispering that creature's. Drank while she slept. He bent down, lifting the rabbit. Its seams were new, stitches too clean. He ripped it open. Something fell out, small, dried, the husk of one of those creatures. Jack staggered back, bile rising in his throat. The old man's voice breaks here, wavering, half mad with memory. Now. Maybe you're thinking I was losing it. That I'd brought the desert back with me, that the war was still crawling in my head. I thought that too. Lord, I thought that too. Because when you stare at things no sane man should see, you start asking yourself, am I seeing it all? Jack clutched the husk in his hand that night, staring at its alien shape, and for a moment he prayed it was a hallucination, that it was his PTSD, that he could take a pill, close his eyes, and wake to find the world sane again. But Ellie's pale face, her trembling hands, her blood drained bit by bit. That wasn't war echoing. That was real. 2 days later, they came for him. He spotted them first at the diner, a man in a gray suit stirring coffee too long, a woman in black sunglasses though the sky was overcast. They didn't look at him, but they didn't need to. Soldiers recognized surveillance. That night, they came to the house. Not knocking, waiting. A black sedan parked across the street, engine purring. Finally, one approached. A tall man mid-40s, coat damp from rain. He spoke with the calm of someone used to secrets. Mr. Harper, we need to talk. Jack's fists clenched. About what? Project K21. The name hit like a bullet. The man glanced toward the house. Your wife, Vanessa. She's not just your wife. She's been a paid collaborator. We've been tracking her for months. And you're standing on ground that's about to collapse. Jack wanted to throw him off the porch. But the man's eyes were steady, the kind that had seen too much to lie easily. Help us, the agent said, or your daughter won't survive. The month, that night, Jack confronted her. Vanessa didn't deny it. Not exactly. She laughed, low, cold. You don't understand, Jack. This isn't cruelty. It's progress. Your daughter, our daughter, is part of something bigger than you can imagine. She's sick. Jack roared. She's dying. No. Vanessa corrected, her smile sharp. She's giving. She's serving, just as you served. This is sacrifice, Jack, the highest form of it. Her words twisted like knives, echoing the very lessons his father had once drilled into him. Sacrifice, honor, giving away pieces of yourself. But this was no sacrifice. This was theft. That night, Jack swore he wouldn't let Ellie out of his sight. He sat by her bed until exhaustion dragged at his bones. He watched her chest rise and fall, slow, fragile, her small hand curled in the blanket. Somewhere in the dark, whispers stirred again, the faint scuttling beneath the bed. Jack. gripped the pistol he'd kept hidden, eyes scanning the shadows. And then silence, too much silence. He leaned forward. The bed was empty. The window stood open, curtains fluttering in the midnight air. The sheets were twisted, the blanket half on the floor. On the pillow, damp with blood, was all that remained. The old man's voice cracks here, trembling with grief. That was the night she vanished. One moment she was there, breathing, alive. The next gone. And all that was left of my little girl was a pillow wet with her blood. They say every man has a breaking point. A place where suspicion and grief turn into something else. Fire. For Jack Harper, that breaking point came the night his daughter disappeared. He had nothing left to lose. And that made him the most dangerous kind of man. The federal agents moved like shadows through the night, their black rifles gleaming with rain, their radios whispering clipped codes. Jack was among them, heavier, slower, but burning with a rage no training could teach. The convoy pulled up to the outskirts of an industrial complex hidden in the woods, a place that looked abandoned from the outside, its gates rusted, its windows dark. But Jack knew better. The truth lived in the shadows beneath. As they breached the gate, the silence was broken by the screech of metal, the hiss of hydraulics. Doors groaned open, revealing stairwells that plunged into the earth. The facility wasn't above ground, it was buried. The air grew colder as they descended. Concrete gave way to steel. Corridors stretched long and narrow, their walls lined with pipes that hissed faintly, dripping condensation. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, buzzing like dying insects. And beneath it all, there was a sound, soft, haunting, children crying. It echoed through the halls, bouncing off the steel until you couldn't tell where it came from. Doors lined the court of thick metal, small windows smeared with condensation. From behind each one came muffled sobs, the pleading voices of boys and girls trapped in nightmares not of their making. Jack's fists clenched. The soldier in him wanted to break every door, free every child. But the father in him knew he had one mission. Ellie. They found her at the heart of the facility. Vanessa stood in the control room, white coat draped over. Her polished frame, monitors glowing around her. On the screens, feeds of children strapped to beds, wires and tubes running into machines that pulsed with a steady rhythm. When she saw Jack, she didn't flinch. She smiled. "Jack, you came." He raised his pistol, his voice raw. "Where is she?" Vanessa's eyes glittered with cold triumph. "Safe. Safer than you can ever make her. You did this." He spat. "You put her in this hell. You don't understand." Her tone sharpened, almost desperate. Project K21 isn't cruelty, it's salvation. These organisms, these proteins, they could cure disease, extend life, save humanity from itself. You're killing children. No. She stepped closer, her smile curdling. We're using them, just as the world used you. Sacrifice is the foundation of progress, Jack. And your daughter. She was chosen. Jack's hand trembled on the trigger. Not from fear, from the weight of rage he could barely contain. Then he saw her. Through the glass wall of an adjoining chamber, Ellie, strapped to a containment bed, tubes snaking from her small arms, her skin pale as paper. Monitors beeped steadily, displaying numbers he didn't understand but knew were wrong. Her chest rose and fell weakly, too shallow. "Daddy!" Her lips formed, though no sound came through the glass. Jack's heart stopped. For a moment. He was no soldier, no man, just a father breaking apart. He moved without thought. His rifle butt smashed against the glass, once, twice, until cracks spidered out across its surface. Guards rushed in, men in black armor, rifles raised. Jack spun, firing. The corridor exploded in muzzle flashes, bullets ricocheting off steel. The agents behind him opened fire, covering his advance. One guard lunged with a baton crackling. Blue with electricity. Jack caught him, slammed him against the wall, and drove his knife under the man's ribcage. The scream cut short. Another came, releasing something from a canister creatures. The remnants of Project K-21. They spilled onto the floor, skittering like mechanical insects, their bodies pulsing with eerie light. They swarmed toward Jack, needle limbs clicking. He stomped one, crushed another with the butt of his rifle. But more came, crawling up his boots, their hooks biting into leather, into flesh. With a roar, Jack fired downward, the muzzle flash, illuminating the swarm as pieces of them burst, splattering clear fluid across the floor. Then one final blow. He drove his shoulder into the cracked glass of the chamber, shattering it inward. He was at Ellie's side. Her eyes fluttered open as he tore the tubes from her arms. Blood welled at the punctures, staining his hands. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. "I've got you," he said, scooping her into his arms. "I've got you." Peanut. Alarms blared. Red lights flashed. Vanessa screamed orders into a console, summoning reinforcements. The facility shook with the thunder of boots and the hiss of released gas. Jack knew then he couldn't fight forever. But he could end it. On the wall, a console with blinking red buttons. A warning label, Emergency Destruction Protocol. He set Ellie down gently, kissing her forehead. "Close your eyes." Then he pulled the lever. The sirens rose to a shriek. The floor rumbled as charges ignited deep within the walls. Steel groaned. Flames erupted down the corridors, devouring everything. Guards shouted, scrambling for exits. Vanessa's voice rose above them all, shrill with fury. "You fool! Do you know what you've destroyed? This could have saved the world." Jack turned. Once, meeting her eyes across the chaos. "I don't care about the world. I care about her." Then the explosion swallowed the room. The agents cleared a path, shouting for him to run. Jack scooped Ellie into his arms, shielding her from the smoke and falling debris. Heat seared his back, flames licking at his boots as he sprinted down the collapsing corridors. Behind them, the facility caved in, metal shrieking, walls folding in on themselves. Creatures writhed in the fire, their cries sharp and alien, until they burned to ash. Jack burst through the final exit, just as the ground buckled. The night sky opened above him, rain cooling his blistered skin. The forest alive with the roar of destruction below. He stumbled into the mud, Ellie still cradled against his chest. For a long moment, he thought she was gone. Her body lay limp, her face pale, her lips still. Then her hand twitched. Her eyes fluttered open. And in the softest, weakest voice, she whispered, "Daddy, I knew you'd come." The old man's voice breaks here, ragged with tears not yet shed. And that was it. The war, the whispers, the shadows, they all ended in that moment, because she was alive. My little girl was alive, and nothing else in this broken world mattered. The facility burned through the night, a secret buried beneath rubble and ash. The agents vanished soon after, their mission complete, their silence purchased by secrecy and government chains. But Jack didn't care. He had Ellie in his arms. And as he walked through the rain, every step heavy, every breath ragged, he knew he'd destroyed something bigger than himself. Project K-21 was gone. And so were the monsters that haunted his daughter's nights. At least most of them, because in the quiet years that followed, Jack sometimes swore he still heard whispers beneath her pillow. They say every story has an ending, but fathers know better. A father's story doesn't end with survival. It doesn't end with victory. It ends when the child you've carried in your arms no longer needs you to. And even then, the story echoes. My name doesn't matter anymore. I am just a man with gray in his hair, scars on his hands, and memories that never quite let go. But if you must know the truth, the whole truth, then I'll tell you what happened after the flames, after the night the ground swallowed the whispers, I'll tell you about what we built from the ashes. Ellie survived. That's the first thing I need you to understand. When I carried her out of that inferno, her skin pale as bone, her pulse fragile as a thread, I thought I was losing her even then. But children are stronger than we know, stronger than the world allows them to be. She clung to life with the same stubbornness I'd seen in her mother's smile long ago, the same fire I'd prayed she'd inherit from me. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The fever subsided. The streaks on her arms faded, though faint scars remain, tiny ghost lines like ink smeared across parchment. Doctors couldn't explain it. They never could. But I didn't need their explanations anymore. I had seen the truth. And though she was alive, though she laughed again, though she grew taller and filled her notebooks with doodles of flowers and suns, I never stopped hearing the echoes. At night, when the house was quiet, I would walk past her room. I'd pause, hand on the doorknob, listening for the sound of her breath. She slept peacefully most nights. But there were moments, brief, fleeting, when she'd twitch, or whisper, or murmur words in dreams too old for a child. And in those moments, my chest would seize. My mind would whisper, what if they're still inside her? What if the creatures left seeds you cannot see? You see, survival doesn't erase suspicion. It deepens it. The government buried the facility. They buried the files. They buried the witnesses. Project K-21 was gone, they said. But men like me, we know shadows never die. They just wait for new names, new coats of paint, new masks to wear. So I decided, if I couldn't trust them to guard the future, I would do it myself. That was the beginning of the Ellie Foundation. It started small. Just me, a handful of OIs, some federal men who couldn't stomach the silence, doctors who had seen too much, mothers who had lost children, they were told, died of fevers. We pooled what we had: money, time, fury. The mission was simple: protect the forgotten, protect the vulnerable, protect the children whose cries went unheard in the dark corners of our systems. We built shelters. We funded research into trauma care. We lobbied for laws that gave families more power, more oversight, more protection against exploitation, hidden behind medical jargon. And when I stood before cameras, my voice hoarse, my hands trembling, I told the story, not all of it. Not the monsters or the whispers, but enough. Enough to wake people up. Enough to make them care. Because here's the truth. A father's duty isn't just to protect his child. It's to protect every child. Ellie's name became more than a scar in my heart. It became a promise, a shield, a foundation. Time passes. It always does, no matter how tightly you try to hold it. Ellie grew up. She learned to ride a bike, to sing songs in the shower, to roll her eyes when I embarrassed her in front of friends. She grew into the kind of young woman who carried both gentleness and steel inside her. Gentleness from her own soul, steel from the battle she never asked to fight. She knows, of course, I never lied to her. When she was old enough, I told her everything, or almost everything. She cried, yes. She shook, yes. But she didn't run from the truth. She looked me in the eye and said, then we have to make sure it never happens again. That's Ellie, not just a survivor, a protector. Today she works with the foundation, her name on the letterhead, not as a victim, but as a leader. She stands in rooms I could never enter, speaks to people who never listened to me, and somehow she makes them listen. And when I watch her, I feel pride. The kind of pride that aches, because it is built from pain. But pride does not silence doubt. I am old now. My nights are longer, my bones heavier. And in the hours when sleep won't come, I still hear it. That whisper. Not always, not often, but enough. Sometimes when I visit hospitals the foundation funds, I see children in beds, IVs in their arms, monitors beeping. Sometimes their eyes look too much like Ellie's once did, wide, afraid, knowing something they can't say. And sometimes, when the halls grow quiet, I swear I hear scuttling beneath the floors, You'll say it's my memory, my trauma, my war. And maybe you're right. Maybe it's all ghosts of the past clawing at the edges of my mind. But what if it isn't? What if the fire I lit in that facility didn't consume everything? What if Project K21 still breathes somewhere, under a new name, in a new place? What if other children still whisper into their pillows tonight? That is why I tell this story. Not for pity, not for legacy, but for warning. Because the monsters we fear most aren't the ones with claws and fangs. They're the ones who wear suits, write reports, and call cruelty progress. They're the ones who say sacrifice is necessary. That your child, my child, any child is expendable. And I tell you now, no child is expendable. Not mine. Not yours. Not ever. So when you tuck your little one into bed tonight, kiss their forehead, smooth the blanket, whisper your love. And then pause, just pause. Listen closely, because if you hear it, the faintest whisper beneath the pillow, you'll know. And God help you. You'll know. They say wars end when the guns fall silent. But I learned different. Wars don't end. They echo, they bleed into the years that follow. They shape the way you walk, the way you breathe, the way you tuck your child in at night. They sit heavy, in the marrow of your bones, waiting for the quiet to remind you they're still there. For me, the war never ended in the desert. It ended in a basement filled with machines and whispers. It ended the night I pulled my daughter from the jaws of something no man should have seen, and yet, it didn't end. Not truly. Ellie healed, though not easily. The marks on her skin faded in time, but I swear some nights they glowed faintly in the dark, like embers refusing to die. Doctors called them birth anomalies, scars they gave me long. Words meant to cover the truth like bandages over a wound too deep to close. But Ellie knew. I saw it in her eyes, even when she smiled. She carried a memory that no child should have carried. She'd wake some nights trembling, whispering that she still felt them crawling under her pillow. I would hold her until dawn, whispering back that they couldn't reach her anymore. But inside, I wondered if I was lying. The world didn't believe me. There were no headlines about Project K21, no investigations, no trials. The government buried the facility under rubble, then under paperwork, until even the ashes were forgotten. The agents who had marched with me into the dark disappeared into silence. And Vanessa, her name erased, her record vanished, as though she'd never lived at all. But I remembered. And I refused to let Ellie become another file marked closed. I sold the house, left the town, and with what little I had, I began something new. The Ellie Foundation. At first, it was just me and a few others who believed, parents who'd seen things they couldn't explain, doctors who had noticed patterns in children's illnesses that didn't fit the books. We met in church basements, in borrowed halls, speaking in whispers about whispers. But it grew. Word spread. Families came forward quiet, ashamed, afraid of being dismissed as hysterical. They told stories that echoed my own. Fevers no doctor could trace, marks no test could identify. Children speaking of shadows at night that drained them of strength. The foundation became more than a refuge. It became a weapon. We fought for recognition, for research, for protection. We demanded answers from men who had spent their lives perfecting silence. And though we were ignored, though we were ridiculed, we did not stop. Because when you've looked into your child's eyes and seen something unspeakable feeding on them, you don't stop. Ever. Ellie grew. Taller, stronger, her laughter louder. With every year that passed, she learned to ride a bike on cracked sidewalks, to play piano in a room that smelled of dust and sunlight. For a while, she was just a child again, and I allowed myself to believe she had left the shadows behind. But sometimes, when she played in the yard, she'd stop suddenly, looking toward the trees as if she heard something I could not. Sometimes she'd wake with nosebleeds, her pillow stained red. And once, on a summer night, I found her standing barefoot at the window, her breath fogging the glass. "What are you looking at, Peanut?" I asked. Her voice was soft, certain. "They're not gone, Daddy. They're waiting." I didn't argue. What could I say? That she was wrong? That the world was safe? I had lied to her once before, and it had nearly cost her everything. I would not lie again. So I began to tell the story. Not to everyone, some ears are deaf no matter how loud you scream. But to those who would listen, to fathers sitting by hospital beds, to mothers clutching photographs of children lost to unexplained causes, to strangers who still believed in whispers, I told them about the night I came home from war and found a new battlefield waiting in my daughter's room. About the marks, the whispers, the locked doors, the lies. About the choice I made to burn it all down, no matter the cost. And every time I told it, I ended the same way. A father's duty isn't just to protect his child. It's to protect every child. That was the creed of the Ellie Foundation. That was the reason I kept breathing when everything in me wanted to stop. But memory cuts both ways. It preserves what we love. It also preserves what we fear. And late at night, when the house is quiet, I still hear it. The whisper. Dry, brittle. Like leaves scraping glass. Sometimes it comes from Ellie's room. Sometimes from the corner of my own. Sometimes from nowhere at all. And I wonder, did I truly destroy Project K21? Or did I just burn one nest while the swarm scattered into the dark? The world is wide. Basements run deep. And children sleep everywhere. Ellie is grown now. She carries her scars like medals, invisible to most, but I see them. I always will. She laughs louder than her mother ever did, fights harder than I ever could. And when I see her speak to other children who come to the foundation, I realize she is stronger than both of us combined. But every so often, I catch her staring at a pillow too long. And I know she remembers. So I'll leave you with this. Not as a soldier, not as a storyteller. As a father, when you tuck your child in tonight, listen closely. If you hear a whisper, don't dismiss it. Don't call it imagination, because whispers don't come from nowhere. And some wars never truly end.